Episode 223, The Return Back Home. After eating, Jake drove them to the place where they met Steven the previous day. He stopped the car, dropped them off, and immediately took his wife to park. Wearing ill-fitting shoes, Miranda's posture was a bit weird. She stumbled toward her home. Feeling that Steven was walking behind her, she felt quite disturbed. She turned around and looked at him, saying unceremoniously, "Make a list of the clothes and shoes I'm wearing, as well as the clothes from last night, coffee, room fee, and the taxi fare. I'll pay you, and we will be even, okay?" He arched an eyebrow, and seeing how willing she was to cut him out of her life, he clenched his fists. "Forget it. What's your account number? I'll pay you directly, saving the trouble." She sounded impatient and distant with her hand in her pocket.
"These you can pay for. However, my virgin body you can't afford."
It was also my first time, and judging by how skilled you were, you shouldn't pretend to be a virgin. We live in a modern society, and you were head over heels for that Lila woman who knows what you did. Before she finished her sentence, she was pressed against the wall behind her. Startled, she immediately stopped talking. His eyes were full of anger. He was staring at her as if he wished to shred her into pieces. She saw him like this and was a bit scared. But in the end, as a wise woman, she sneered, her almond-shaped eyes filled with irony. "Why, aren't you going to let me talk about that wench Lila Cox this way? Now you are both single, so isn't that perfect? A dishonest man and woman together, made for each other." Steven put his hand on her lips, forcing her to shut up. But this time the gesture was different. Earlier he had been gentle and mindful, and now he was rough, violent. He was using no skill. He was angry. He was displaying his strength. There was nothing more to it. She clearly noticed his emotions and struggled with both hands and feet. But he was pressing her shoulders down. No matter how she struggled, she couldn't move. She bit his hand. He frowned in pain and yanked his hand away. Just as his hand parted from her lips, a drop of liquid dropped onto her hand. Miranda gasped. The sweet taste filled her mouth, and slowly the liquid slid down her lips. She wiped her mouth and saw a touch of red. She had bit his hand so hard that she ended up biting her own lip. Steven saw the blood on her lips and calmed down. Reaching out and gently rubbing her lips, he felt her cold gaze.
"Miranda, listen."
"Go to hell!" she said. The blood splattered a little as she yelled. He closed his eyes and wiped his face. Miranda used all her strength to push him away, sneered and then ran away. Steven looked at her from behind, clenched his fists several times, and finally gave up in frustration. Miranda had no money and no key. She reached her apartment building and kept pressing the doorbell like crazy. She waited a few minutes before someone came out to open the door. Mrs. Young's eyes were still groggy. Seeing the blood on her lips, she became wide awake and gasped.
"What happened? Did you and Steven get into a fight?"
Miranda heard the words of her mother, smiled coldly, and walked into the room with a sullen face. She warned, "If anything like last night happens again, Mum, I will disown you." After saying, she slammed the door, making a loud bang. Feeling ominous, Miranda's mother immediately called Steven to inquire about the situation. In the evening, Jake's car was waiting at the entrance of the Fontaine Hotel. Steven came down, but Miranda was not with him. It was not because her mother refused, but because she didn't want to see Steven. He was afraid that she hated him even more than before. He knew that very well, so when Mrs. Young had called him, he did not say anything that should not be said. They left immediately. When they reached Austin, it was late at night. After saying goodbye to Steven, Jake drove directly back to the old house. However,
What he did not expect was that when they got home, they were greeted with a big fight. "If your supervisor didn't call me, I would not even know about it." Serena had just entered through the front door when she heard the angry voice of her father-in-law, Carson Robinson. She rushed in. The sound came from the study. Serena ran in there and saw Keith kneeling on the floor with his head down at first glance. Holding the birch, Carson Robinson looked furious. "You have grown up, right? You are only 25 years old and have such a good future. There are only a few who can become a major at your age. And you..." As he said that, he was about to whip Keith. Frightened, Serena quickly shouted, "Father!" The whip was 2 fingers thick. If hit by it, his flesh would be torn apart. When Carson saw Serena coming in, his anger was slightly alleviated as he asked, "Where is Jake?" Just at that moment, Jake walked in and saw the scene inside. He gently pulled her and said, "Go to sleep." She turned to look inside the study and hesitated. "It's okay. Let's go." He pulled her to the bedroom. As anxious as she was, she knew that this was not something she could participate in. After showering, she was lying on the bed, tossing and turning when he came in. "What happened?" she asked. He walked over and sat down at the bedside, gently shaking his head. "Father was livid. He hit him once, but Keith is okay. He's more fit than I am, and there should be no problem." Serena had a vague feeling that it should be more than just a whip, but she still let out a sigh of relief and said, "That kind of birch could kill." "Keith is his son, and no matter how angry he is, he will not kill him. However, Dad and Grandpa are both very disappointed." "Well, he has his own pursuits. However, you must warn him not to do anything illegal. Since he's no longer a soldier, maybe he could join you in your business. That way he will be in a good place," she suggested. In her previous lifetime, Keith had made too many enemies and had been hunted several times. Every time the news came to the old house, Grandpa and her father-in-law had been furious and greatly disappointed. In his life, Keith no longer participated in those type of illegal activities, so she hoped there might not be so many accidents. Jake nodded and rubbed her head, feeling a bit jealous. "The boy is very sneaky. He will not necessarily listen to me. Don't think about it too much. Go to sleep now." When she woke up, she was still exhausted with the travel. After resting for a day at home playing chess with Grandpa, Serena went to sleep early that night. On the next day, in her sleep, Serena felt a big hand moving on her body early in the morning. She moaned and removed his hand. However, this hand became even naughtier and started to tickle her waist. Being ticklish, she could not help laughing. Holding his hand, she chuckled and said in a girlish tone, "Stop it!" With a smile, he helped her up and put her robe on. "Get up. We have something to do today." Then he decided he wanted to take the robe off. "What is it?" She opened her groggy eyes when she was suddenly undressed by him. She shuddered and covered her chest. "No!" Jake chuckled and tapped her on the nose, handing over the clothes he had already prepared. "What are you thinking? Put on your clothes." Mortified, Serena took her bra from him and gave him a stare. He saw it, leaned over and whispered, "If you want, I can also—" "No!" She pushed him away. "You will hurt the baby." "What are you talking about? I was going to say I can also help you get dressed." He took the bra in her hand, leaning in to help her put it on. Her face went red again. Mesmerized, Jake stopped breathing for a second. Instead of going back, he took her into his arms and gently sucked on her earlobe. Serena shuddered and put her hands on his chest, making ambiguous moans. But she quickly stopped herself and whispered,
"Didn't you say we have something to do today? Don't bite!"
Jake took the dress that had just been prepared for her and put it on her. With an even bigger smile, she murmured,
"I'm just pregnant, not paralyzed. You get me dressed every day. What if I don't know how to dress myself in the future?"
"Then I will help you get dressed all your life." His nose touched hers before he kissed her lips. "Now may I ask Mrs. Robinson to raise her arms, so that I could put them into the sleeves?"
"Very well, Mr. Robinson."
After Serena got dressed and walked out, she discovered that it was already past 12 p.m. No wonder Jake had come to wake her up. Keith had gone to the hospital after his encounter with his father, and he was doing much better now. He was always wearing just a shirt, so he looked particularly bloated and pale today. When he saw Serena, he called, "Sister-in-law, how are you?" Keith smiled and raised his hand. It was difficult for him to pick up the cutlery. He sucked in some cold air while eating.
"You look much better? Why didn't you get yourself admitted to the hospital? The nurses would have taken much better care of you,"
she said, concerned. Serena took away his fork and helped him pick up the dish he was trying to get. When she was about to feed him, Jake reached out, took her fork, and forced the piece of food into his brother's mouth. "Dad wants to let him suffer, so he cannot stay in the hospital. It's okay. He can't die anyway."